African resistance here in Oakland, and it's always amazing to be here. And I want to join Comrade Rose in starting by saluting the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and by extension, the leader of the entire world in fighting for an end to oppression and exploitation of all human beings. And that is Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru to the chairman, Uhuru. Uhuru. And I also want to salute the visionary leader in the African People's Socialist Party, who is referred to as the architect of building the Black Power Blueprint, which is a project that we're talking about today and that we are raising reparations for. An amazing revolutionary African woman who is the deputy chair of the African People's Socialist Party, Ona Zane Yeshitela. Uhuru to deputy chair. And I also want to salute the keynote speaker of this event and a member of the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, who has a long history fighting for the liberation of Africa and African people, which is Bakri Olatunji. Uhuru. I also want to salute Seali Moyende. Am I saying your name right? Moyenda. I'm sorry, Seali. Seali is also another long-standing member of this movement who has been fighting for many, many years, decades, on the front lines, fighting for black power in the hands of the African working class. So, Uhuru Seali. And finally, I want to salute all of you and the African People's Solidarity Committee members here locally, Maureen, Kara, Janine, Pete, Stephanie, and others I'm probably forgetting, but everyone who was part of making this event happen today. And I also want to salute my direct leadership, the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny. I know she would love to be here right now, but she just embarked on a very historic move of relocating the national office of the African People's Solidarity Committee from St. Petersburg, Florida, to St. Louis, Missouri. So she just moved there. So Uhuru to Chairwoman Penny, and she's actually in St. Louis right now, attending a major conference hosted by the African People's Socialist Party of the African National Women's Organization. So this is a very dynamic movement where, as we were just discussing earlier, every single day, not only is there a major event happening, there are multiple major events happening in different time zones in this country and in the world under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So thank you all again for being here, and I want to say a little bit more about the significance of being part of this movement under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And we saw a clip of the chairman in that video, and we have to really understand the significance of this leader. He is someone who lived through that period in the 1960s when revolution, as he describes it, was the main trend throughout the world. Revolution was trendy. You had China, you had Vietnam, you had Cuba, you had all these peoples around the world, and you had the Black Power movement inside this country that was a revolution inside this country that shook the foundations of US imperialism, and which so terrified the white ruling class that the FBI's director at the time referred to the black revolution inside this country as the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States since the Civil War. And that was the era in which Chairman Omali Yeshitela arose as a leader in the Black Power movement in St. Petersburg, Florida, and throughout the US, and built organization on the ground. And not only was he alive during that time, he also lived and struggled during the period that came right after, that he described as the counterinsurgency, when the US government initiated a campaign of murder and terror and assassination and slander and arrest and imprisonment and forcing leaders into exile, and made a mission, a stated mission that they actually wrote in memos that they sent to FBI field offices throughout the country to destroy the Black Revolution. And Chairman Omali Yeshitela is the only one who was able to accurately sum up that the Black Revolution didn't go out of style or didn't get phased out because some of its gains were met, so they shifted the field of struggle elsewhere or something like that. No. The Black Revolution of the 1960s was militarily destroyed. It was crushed. Malcolm X was killed. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Fred Hampton was assassinated. Many, many others, over 30 members of the Black Panther Party were assassinated. Chairman Omali Yeshitela himself was in and out of jail all the time, and this was the era, the terror that was brought down against the Black Revolution. And after that, there was a long stretch of time where the world went with 2 generations without any example of what a revolutionary movement or organization looked like. And it was during that long, painful, horrible, difficult stretch of time that Chairman Omali Yeshitela stood alone in keeping the question of revolution alive in the world. So that is the significance of the chairman that we have to understand. And as Chairwoman Penny Hess has observed, how we shudder to think what the world would be like today had Chairman Omali Yeshitela not taken that stand, or not been there to do that. So, Uhuru. So we're here to talk today about diamonds, but we're actually talking about a lot of other things as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we are holding a tour called All Diamonds Are Blood Diamonds. This is a 10-city speaking tour. We just came back from Seattle and Portland. We were in other places in the north, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, St. Petersburg, and Gainesville in Florida, and now we're here in Oakland. So this is a 10-city tour, next heading to St. Louis and Louisville. And I want to talk about why we chose to highlight this subject of blood diamonds, but I also want to talk about how, I want to talk about capitalism. These are the 3 things we're going to talk about. Capitalism, and how the world came to be dominated by capitalism. Socialism, and how the world can come to be dominated by socialism. And reparations, and the role of reparations in making that happen. So, first of all, diamonds. Why diamonds? So, many people have probably heard of this concept of a blood diamond. And the reason why you've heard about this concept, ironically, is because of the diamond industry. In fact, it was De Beers Diamonds, which is the biggest diamond cartel in the world, that was founded by Cecil Rhodes, whose picture we saw, who went into southern Africa and viciously colonized southern Africa and took it as his property and forced African workers and children to mine for diamonds. It was De Beers Diamonds that created the idea of a blood diamond. The reason why they created the idea of a blood diamond was to scare diamond buyers away from diamonds from mines that had allegedly been taken over by Africans, that they referred to as warlords and things like that. So basically, De Beers wanted a monopoly on the diamond trade, and they have always had a monopoly on the diamond trade. So they created this idea of blood diamonds to say, don't buy those diamonds where you don't know where they come from. Buy our diamonds, which have gone through the Kimberley process and have been certified, blah, 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 blah. But the ultimate blood diamond is actually a De Beers diamond.
Wow.
And if you look at the history of diamonds, diamonds have no intrinsic value. The De Beers company created a market for diamonds by doing 2 things. One, they manufactured scarcity by keeping diamonds off the market. So they made diamonds into a rare commodity. And secondly, they initiated one of the most elaborate propaganda marketing campaigns of all time to convince white people that diamonds are a girl's best friend, that diamonds are forever, that diamonds are the ultimate symbol of luxury, romance, and wealth. And your fiance is not going to talk to you if you don't get down on your knee and propose to them with a diamond ring, etc., etc. All of these things were pumped into the brains of white people who, we willingly accepted it and upheld those ideas. And on the other side of that mythology of the diamond as being this symbol of wealth and romance is the immense suffering of African people, is 130 million African children who have been forced to work in mines, is African people who dig the dirt out of the ground every single day in Sierra Leone who have never seen a polished diamond in their lives, in their entire lifetime, is African people in Sierra Leone who, if the colonial overseer is feeling generous, will give them 30 cents and a cup of rice a day to dig the diamonds out of the ground. So we chose to have a tour about blood diamonds because that is capitalism. A whole false narrative of luxury and wealth and opportunity and romance and all this for white people, and just on the other side of that is the bloodshed and misery of African people everywhere. That is capitalism. So we want to talk about how did this come to be, that we live in a world dominated by this horrific social system called capitalism, which it is horrific. That's very clear to most people today. You look around the world, and white people are a minority of the world population, but we consume and control most of the world's resources. The average white child in this country consumes the same amount of resources as 35 children combined in the rest of the world. So what is this? How did this happen? How did it come to be that white people would have the highest standard of living on the planet Earth while the vast majority of the rest of the human beings on this planet are starving and dying? How did that come to be? Chairman Omali Yeshitela set out to answer that question when he created a political theory called African internationalism. African internationalism is what I'm saying to you right now. And I could not have come to these conclusions on my own as a white person, nor can any white person. And there's 600 years of evidence to prove that. It took Chairman Omali Yeshitela, an African living under the pedestal of the oppression of capitalism, to be able to analyze it correctly and to explain how to overturn it. And what he proved through his theory of African internationalism is that before white people left Europe and assaulted the rest of the earth, there was no capitalism, there was no Europe, there was no white people. On this barren rock that later came to be known as Europe, there were various warring tribes with scarce resources constantly at each other's throats. Celts, Goths, Vandals, etc., constantly at each other's throats for access to scarce resources, dying from bubonic plague, over half the population dying in 4 short years, and living under feudalism, not capitalism, under feudalism, a system where most people were serfs, poor serfs tied to the land owned by the nobility. And the rest of the world, by the way, they call that the Dark Ages. But it was the Dark Ages, quote unquote, for white people. Because the rest of the planet Earth was very bright. You had magnificent, beautiful, flowering civilizations happening in Africa, in China, in India, in Persia, in the, what later came to be called the Americas, indigenous people. Like the rest of the world was enjoying advanced civilization before white people mastered fire. That's a literal truth. That's a literal truth. So the way that we rescued ourselves from that predicament is we left Europe. We banded together, no longer as warring tribes, but now as a common group with a common goal, which is to go to other lands and enslave other people and take their land. And we went to Africa, we enslaved African people, we forced millions of African people onto ships and brought them to this part of the world and other places to work for hundreds of years against their will for nothing, to build the greatest concentration of wealth that has ever happened on the planet Earth in capitalism. And we stole this land from the indigenous people, slaughtered over 100 million indigenous people on this land, and took this land and named it America, and so on and so forth. So this is how capitalism was born. Capitalism was born from slavery and genocide, not from white people in England making guilds and making, hats and things like that or whatever. From slavery and genocide. That is what gave birth to capitalism. That is what gave birth to a common identity amongst those of us who were once warring tribes in Europe, who now became the white man, who now became the European. And that's what created the sense of sameness amongst Europe and Europeans. So that's where it all came from. That is why today, white people are living off better than anybody else on the planet Earth. Not because we're smarter or more civilized or we save our money well or we have more morality or whatever the lies that we're told. That's why. Because we gained this status on the pedestal of the most horrific violence you can possibly imagine. And that's another point that Chairman Omali Yeshitela pointed out in describing how this process came about. That ordinary white people were not bystanders in this process. It wasn't like it was just the Ku Klux Klan or some fringe group of white extremists who were going out there committing violence against African people. Actually, it was everyday white people, white men, women, and children, who gathered in the thousands to steal this land from the indigenous people, to form the volunteer cavalries, to scalp indigenous people and commit torture against indigenous women and children. And it was ordinary white people who gathered in the thousands to lynch African human beings, to tear the wombs out of African women and stomp on the skull of the child at a massive public lynching. There were open festivals of sadistic torture and violence that white people carried out voluntarily, enthusiastically. No one told us to do it. We just did it to gain access to the wealth and to secure our place, to become white people, to secure our place on the pedestal of the oppression on the backs of enslaved and tortured African people. There's a book that came out a few years ago called The Half Has Never Been Told, which showed that at the height of chattel slavery in this country, a greater percentage of the white population participated in torture than any other society in human history. There has never been a society in human history where a greater percentage of the citizens of that society were torturing human beings. We were torturing Africans. So we're a tortured nation. That's what white people are, and that's what capitalism is. And this is how it came to be. So these are the things that Chairman Omali Yeshitela exposed. It's an uncomfortable reality to face, and it explodes everything that we're taught about how the world came to be. And even the idea of that, even if we're not given an explanation, we just take it for granted. It's the first world and the third world. And we see images of starving African children on television, and it says send 35 cents a day to Rwanda. And we just accept it, like that's normal. Like Africa is just this charity case for Bono and U2 to go perform concerts and for Angelina Jolie to go steal African children. Like it's just normal. But as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has said, Africa is not poor, Africa is being looted. And Africa has been systematically looted for the last 600 years. So capitalism, that's how capitalism came to be. And that's why we hate capitalism. And some of us hate capitalism and don't even realize that fact about it. We hate it for other reasons because it makes no sense, and there's the 1%, quote unquote, who hoard all the wealth, and there's all this income disparities, and there's just all these things that you don't like. Healthcare costs money, like all these things, education costs money, like there's a lot of things that you hate about capitalism, but the essential reality of capitalism is that it's a parasite on the body of humanity, and that it's built on slavery and genocide. So this is what Chairman Omali Yeshitela has laid out. And this brings us to the question of, well, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is to destroy capitalism and to create world socialism. So let's talk about socialism, because you're now hearing this word. This used to be a word that I probably wouldn't even say even at one of our own events. I would try to ease into it eventually, but now, whatever, we can just come right out and say it. We're socialists. We are socialists. And I can say that as a white person and not feel ridiculous because I'm under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And compared to most people that you hear talking about socialism today, Bernie Sanders wants you to believe he's a socialist. He claims he's a socialist. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other Democrats who are in the government want you to think that they are socialists. And according to Bernie Sanders, socialism means that there will be universal health care and workers will get $15 an hour minimum over a number of years, or something like that. But, you can't just take a word and just come up with a new definition for it. Like, socialism means something. You can't just make up your own. Like, socialism, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has explained, is that stage in history when the workers come to power, when the workers control the means of production and have state power. And as Chairman Omali has said, that the real class struggle in the world is the anti-colonial struggle. So the real working class is the black working class. The real working class is the African working class. The anti-colonial struggle of the African working class is the leadership of the world struggle against capitalism and against the capitalist white ruling class. And therefore is the leadership of the struggle for socialism. Because capitalism is a world system built on a foundation of African oppression. And socialism will be born as a world system built on a foundation of African liberation. The enslavement of African people gave birth to capitalism. The liberation of African people will give death to capitalism and birth to socialism. And socialism is no human being living at the expense of anybody else. Socialism is no elder being disrespected, no one is being abused and tortured in prison. This is socialism. Socialism is everyone has a place to live, has the means to eat, has the ability to live, productive and prosperous lives according to their own ability and to each according to their own need. That is socialism. That's the world I want to be a part of, and I assume everybody here does as well. That's why I joined this movement, to be under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So now how does this relate to reparations? What is the role of reparations, and what even is reparations? Because this is another word now, I don't know if you've noticed, that you are starting to hear more and more coming from the mainstream. They're talking about reparations. Even several candidates who are running for office, for president, they're running for president in the Democratic primary, have come out and said that they are for reparations, which is completely a consequence of the work done by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party that they even have to say the word reparations. That word would be pushed into the national conversation like that is the work of the African People's Socialist Party since 1982, when Chairman Omali Yeshitela led the first World Tribunal on reparations to black people in the United States and found that the United States owed, at the time, in that year's currency value, $4.3 trillion to African people for the cost of unpaid labor alone, which today translates to $14.2 trillion. Chairman Omali Yeshitela led 12 tribunals internationally calling for reparations to African people and waged a campaign with an explicit goal to take reparations out of the courtroom and into the streets and to make reparations a mass popular demand of the African working class and even of white people, and created the Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement to take the conversation and practice of reparations even into the citadel of imperialism, as he puts it, into the comfort centers of white power in the white society. So now, here we are in 2019, and Elizabeth Warren claims that she's for reparations. And Kamala Harris says that she supports reparations. And Marianne Williamson says that she's for reparations. And if you really look at what they claim reparations would look like by their own definition, it is a joke. Like, it's not reparations at all. At all. It's basically just a glorified welfare kind of thing. It's an insult to African people to even call that reparations. But the fact that they have to say reparations is a reflection of what's going on in the world, that the African masses are demanding reparations. And they feel if they want to get the black vote, now they have to come out for reparations. Bernie hasn't gotten the memo. He's still against reparations. He was against it the first time he ran. He was one of the first people to come out and say he was against reparations. And he was asked again recently, and he said, I don't know what it means. What does reparations mean? Well, Bernie, like my family, is Jewish, so I don't think it's that mysterious what reparations means. It was not that mysterious when Jews demanded reparations from Nazi Germany for what happened to Jewish people in Europe, what reparations meant. It means, among other things, it means money. Like, white people, white society owes money to African people. A lot of money. An untold amount of money. And that's just one part of it. But $14.2 trillion is what's owed for labor alone. That doesn't include the lynchings, that doesn't include convict leasing, that doesn't include the private prison system, it doesn't include everything that has happened to African people since then, it doesn't include the looting of Africa. I mean, you can't even quantify what it would look like to pay back everything that is owed to African people without imagining a world without capitalism and America, which is the goal. And as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has said, U.S. imperialism cannot survive a successful struggle for reparations to African people. It cannot survive because the entire thing is built on the stolen riches of Africa. And when African people are victorious in seizing back control of their land, back control of their diamonds, back control of their oil and their gold, and the culture and talent and genius and everything that has been ripped off for the last 6 centuries, capitalism won't have a leg to stand on. So that is why reparations is actually the ultimate weapon against capitalism. Reparations carried out to its ultimate aim, and capitalism cannot coexist in the same universe. So a real white socialist is for reparations. A real white revolutionary is for reparations. A real white anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, progressive, etc. is for reparations to African people. So until Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and all the other ones are ready to say that, they're not getting my vote. So I just wanted to close by saying that reparations, sometimes might scare us as white people, this term. It's like, well, I didn't have anything to do with it. But actually, neither did an African person walking the planet Earth today have anything to do with it. But as Chairman has said, they inherited the legacy of the enslaved. We inherited the legacy of the slave master. And we don't have to be afraid of reparations. Reparations is not a punishment. Reparations is actually a doorway to redemption in the eyes of humanity. Reparations is an invitation from the human family to come into the fold and end our self-imposed exile from the rest of the peoples of the world, where we live in this weird bubble of stolen resources. We have no idea what's going on the rest of the planet. Reparations is saying, hey, come join the rest of the peoples on the planet Earth who are fighting like hell to bring this thing down and build a world without oppression and exploitation. Reparations is actually empowering for us as white people. It's in our interests. And for any sector of the white population who has ever felt anything close to a measure of pain at the hands of the social system, which many white people have, whether as, white women who face violence and sexual abuse, other kinds of degradation under white society, or whether it is white LGBTQ people who face that under white society, whether it is disabled white people, or whether it is even white men who are a lot of depressed and, not very happy and all this kind of thing. Like white society as a whole, many sectors of white society have an issue with white society, with white power. But the solution is not to try to make white power nicer to us. Is not to try to make the army, the US Army, open for all people to join. Now a gay person can join the military. We want trans people to be able to join the military. I actually don't want any of those people to be allowed to join the military because I want them to join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and fight in the real army of justice and freedom for the peoples of the world. I hope Trump bans everybody from joining the US military, honestly. So anyway, that's a side note. But the point is, the real fight back for any sector of white people who suffer under the social system is the African Revolution, is to attack the core contradiction that gives rise to all others, that gives rise to oppression based on gender and sexuality, that gives rise to all other forms of oppression in this society, is the colonial oppression of Africa and African people by white power and white people. The oppressor nation and the oppressed nations. That's the primary conflict in the world that has to be overturned. And through that process, all other issues and struggles can be resolved. Otherwise, it's just trying to make capitalism and imperialism nicer to us, and we have no interest in doing that. But through uniting with the rest of the peoples of the planet Earth, we can be part of a positive vision, a positive future in which no human being lives at the expense of anybody else. And that is the essence of our slogan, unity through reparations. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and very much look forward to and am honored to be on the platform with our keynote speaker, Bakri Olatunji, and thank you all very much for being here today. Uhuru.